The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Alan Pierce did not notice. He sat in front of 3 computer screens, his eyes moving from one to another, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The numbers kept changing, but they all pointed to the same impossible truth. Something big was coming toward Earth. Alan worked at the Deep Space Monitoring Array, a facility built in the desert where scientists watched the sky for dangers. Most days were boring. He would drink coffee, check the readings, and go home to his small apartment. But today was different. Today, the computers were screaming warnings that made his hands shake. He picked up the phone and called his supervisor. His voice cracked when he tried to speak. 347 objects had appeared at the edge of the solar system. They were huge, each one the size of a small city, and they were slowing down. Things in space did not slow down unless something made them slow down. These objects had engines. They were ships. Within 2 hours, the news reached the government. Within 4 hours, every major leader on Earth knew. Within a day, everyone knew. The world stopped. People gathered in the streets, in their homes, around their televisions and computers. They all asked the same question: who was coming, and what did they want? Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the Liberty, an orbital defense station that circled Earth like a guardian. He was 42 years old, with gray hair starting to show at his temples. He had been in the military for 20 years, and he had never been this scared. Through the viewing screen, he could see the alien fleet. They moved in perfect formation, like a school of fish, but deadly. His crew worked around him in tense silence. Sophie Grant sat at the communication station, her fingers moving over the controls. She was young, only 25, and this was supposed to be a routine assignment. Instead, she was watching the end of the world approach. The computers had been running simulations for the past 12 hours. Every single one ended the same way. Earth would lose. The alien ships were too advanced, too powerful. Humanity had spent the last 50 years building space stations and small defense platforms, but they were nothing compared to this fleet. Sophie's station beeped. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. She turned to Jake, and he could see the fear in her eyes. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission," she said. The message came through in a way that surprised everyone. It was not in English or any human language. Instead, it used mathematics, patterns that any intelligent species could understand. The computers translated it quickly. The message was short and clear. The ships belonged to something called the Krell Dominion. They had come to take Earth. Humanity had 72 hours to surrender. If they did not surrender, every human would die. There would be no discussion, no second chances. Jake read the message 3 times. His hands gripped the metal rail in front of him so hard that his knuckles turned white. Around him, his crew sat in shocked silence. Some were crying. Others just stared at their screens, unable to process what they had just read. On Earth, President Helen Morris stood in a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The bunker had been built during the Cold War, designed to protect the government in case of nuclear attack. Now it served a different purpose. She stood in front of cameras preparing to address the world. Helen was 56 years old. She had been president for 3 years, and she had handled many crises. Economic problems, natural disasters, political conflicts. But nothing like this. Nothing that threatened every man, woman, and child on the planet. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice was steady even though her heart was racing. She talked about courage, about the strength of the human spirit, about how humanity had faced impossible odds before and survived. She said that Earth would not surrender, that they would fight. The speech was broadcast everywhere. People watched in cities and small towns, in homes and shelters. Some were inspired. Others knew the truth. Helen knew the truth too. In her private moments, when the cameras were off and the advisors had left, she sat alone and cried. Earth was about to face an enemy it could not beat. In orbit, Jake Harrison gathered his officers. They stood around a table covered with maps and data. He looked at each of them. These were good people, brave people. They deserve better than this. We all know what those simulations said, Jake told them. We know the odds, but we also know our duty. We protect Earth, that has not changed. Sophie spoke up. Her voice was quiet but firm. Sir, even if we cannot win, we can make them pay for every inch. We can show them that humans do not give up. Jake nodded. Around the table, the others straightened up. Fear was still there, but so was something else. Determination. Defiance. the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that had defined humanity throughout its history. Below them, on Earth, families held each other close. Parents tried to comfort children who asked questions they could not answer. Scientists worked frantically to find some weakness in the alien technology. Military forces prepared weapons they knew would not be enough. In a research facility on Mars colony, a man named Marcus Webb studied old data files. 15 years ago, a probe had crashed on Mars. It was alien technology, but not from the Krell. Marcus had spent years studying it, trying to understand how it worked. Now, with death approaching Earth, he looked at those files with new urgency. There was something odd about the probe's energy patterns. They did not match anything human scientists had created. But more importantly, they did not match the energy signatures coming from the Krell ships. It was different, incompatible. Marcus did not know if it mattered. He did not know if it could help. But it was something. And right now, Earth needed every small advantage it could find. The 72 hours began to count down. Across the solar system, humans prepared for war. They checked their weapons, said goodbye to loved ones, and made peace with their fate. The Krell Armada continued its steady approach, confident in its power, unaware that humanity possessed one trait that had kept them alive through ice ages and plagues and wars. Humans did not know how to quit. The Krell attacked at dawn. Not that dawn meant anything in space, but on Earth, people watched the sun rise and wondered if they would see another one. The alien ships moved forward with terrible purpose, their weapons charging with energy that made the sensors scream warnings. Jake Harrison gripped the command rail as the first wave hit. The defense stations around Earth opened fire together, sending streams of metal and energy toward the enemy. For a moment, it looked like they might have a chance. Then the Krell returned fire. 3 defense stations vanished in explosions so bright that people on Earth could see them with their naked eyes. The orbital station guardian was there 1 second and gone the next. 2,000 people died in an instant. Then the station defender exploded. Then freedom. The name seemed cruel now. All batteries fire on the lead ship, Jake ordered. His voice stayed calm even though his heart was pounding. The Liberty shook as its weapons fired, sending projectiles at speeds that could pierce armor plating. The shots hit the Krell cruiser. Jake watched the screens, hoping to see damage. Instead, he saw the alien shields absorb the impact. The shields flickered for just a moment, then held firm. The Krell ship did not even slow down. The return shot from the Krell was devastating. Liberty's left section exploded. Alarm screamed throughout the station. Sophie worked frantically at her controls, trying to seal the damaged sections before all the air escaped into space. Red lights flashed everywhere. The station was dying. On Earth, Dr. Lily Chen stood in the Pacific Defense Command Center, buried deep underground near the coast of California. Screens surrounded her, showing the battle in orbit and the alien ships beginning to enter Earth's atmosphere. She coordinated the ground weapons, trying to find some way to hurt the enemy. Railguns fired from positions around the world. These were massive weapons that used magnetic forces to throw metal at incredible speeds. Missiles launched from hidden silos. Laser weapons, still experimental, focused their beams on the descending Krell ships. Nothing worked. The alien shield stopped everything. Lily watched as Krell landing craft began to descend over major cities. These were smaller than the main ships, but still huge. They looked like pyramids made of dark metal, and they moved through the air as if gravity did not exist. She knew what came next. Occupation forces. The Krell were not just going to destroy Earth, they were going to take it. But then something unexpected happened. On Mars, Marcus Webb had been working without sleep for 3 days. The old alien probe he had been studying kept drawing his attention. The energy patterns were so different from the Krell technology. He ran test after test comparing the data. Finally, at 3 a.m. Mars time, he found it. The probe's energy frequency was not just different. It was specifically incompatible with Krell shield technology, like 2 magnets pushing against each other. If he could generate that same frequency, it might disrupt the Krell shields for a few seconds. Marcus sent the data to Earth in a compressed burst transmission. It took 8 minutes for the signal to reach them. 8 minutes that felt like hours. When the data arrived at Pacific Defense Command, Lily grabbed it immediately. She read through the technical details, her mind racing. It was not much. Just a brief window where the shields would fail. But it was something. She sent the information to every military commander on Earth and in orbit. Jake Harrison received the transmission as Liberty began to fall. Half his crew was dead. Life support was failing. The engines were gone, but the weapons still had power. He looked at the data Marcus had sent and made a decision that he knew would be his last. "Sophie, reroute all remaining power to the forward weapons," he said calmly. "Modify the frequency to match these patterns." Sophie understood immediately what he planned to do. Tears ran down her face as she worked. "Sir, if we do this, there is no escape." "I know," Jake said. He looked around the bridge at the surviving crew members. "Anyone who wants to leave, get to the escape pods now. I will not think less of you." No one moved. They all stayed at their stations. Jake set a collision course for the lead Krell battleship. The massive alien vessel hung in space like a dark star, its weapons destroying human ships one after another. It did not even notice the crippled Liberty changing course. The distance closed. 5 kilometers, 4, 3. The Krell weapons charged, preparing to finish off the dying station. 2 kilometers, 1. Activate the frequency pulse, Jake ordered. Full power to weapons. For Earth. Sophie pressed the controls. The modified frequency burst out from Liberty, hitting the Krell battleship's shields. For exactly 3 seconds, the shields failed. In those 3 seconds, Liberty's weapons fired at point-blank range, and then the station itself crashed into the alien ship. The explosion was enormous. The Krell battleship broke apart, its core exploding in a chain reaction that destroyed 3 nearby cruisers. Jake Harrison and his crew died instantly, but they took 3,000 Krell soldiers with them. On Earth, people watching the battle saw the explosion. For a moment, there was silence. Then in cities around the world, people began to cheer. It was a small victory in a war they were losing, but it meant something. It meant the Krell could be hurt. It meant humanity could fight back, but the celebration did not last long. The remaining Krell ships increased their attack. They were angry now. They had not expected resistance. They had not expected to lose ships. They began to bombard the surface, targeting military installations in major cities. In New York, buildings collapsed as energy beams struck from orbit. In London, fires spread across entire districts. In Tokyo, millions ran for underground shelters. The Krell were making an example of Earth. In the ruins of what had been the command center in Chicago, a woman named Nina Hayes crawled from the wreckage. She had been a colonel in the army, commanding a base that no longer existed. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead. Around her, the city burned. Nina looked up at the sky and saw Krell landing craft settling onto the ground like giant insects. Ramps extended from their sides and soldiers began to emerge. They were tall, covered in armor that seemed to be part of their bodies. They carried weapons that glowed with purple energy. She picked up a rifle from a dead soldier near her. The weapon was damaged but still worked. Nina checked the ammunition and began to move through the rubble. If the Krell wanted Earth, they would have to fight for every street, every building, every inch. Other survivors began to appear. Some were soldiers like Nina. Others were civilians who refused to hide. They gathered weapons and formed groups. The resistance was beginning. In her bunker, President Helen Morris watched the reports come in. The casualties were horrific. Millions dead in the first few hours. Major cities in ruins. But mixed in with the terrible news were other reports. Reports of people fighting back. Of civilians attacking Krell patrols. Of the enemy losing soldiers in urban combat. Lily Chen had escaped the Pacific Defense Command Center before it was destroyed. She made her way to a backup facility hidden in the Amazon rainforest. There, a group of scientists from around the world had gathered. They had one mission: study the data from the old alien probe and find a way to defeat the Krell. As Earth burned and bled, humanity began to understand something. The war was not over. The Krell had won the first battle, but humans were still fighting. And as long as even one human stood defiant, there was still hope. The weeks after the invasion were the darkest in human history. The Krell controlled the skies and had set up bases in every major city. Their soldiers patrolled the streets, and anyone who resisted was killed immediately. But humans had never been good at following orders from conquerors. Nina Hayes led a resistance cell from the tunnels beneath New York City. These tunnels had been built over centuries, layer upon layer of subway systems, maintenance passages, and forgotten spaces. The Krell knew they existed, but the tunnels were too complex for them to control. Down here in the darkness, humanity still had freedom. Nina's group numbered 43 people. Some were former soldiers. Others were civilians who had lost everything and wanted revenge. They lived in a converted maintenance station, sleeping on old mattresses and eating whatever food they could scavenge or steal. The weapon technology Marcus Webb had discovered became their lifeline. Nina's group built crude devices that could generate the frequency pulse for a few seconds. It was not much, but it was enough. When a Krell patrol came through their territory, they would wait in ambush. The pulse would drop the shields and human weapons would do the rest. Each small victory cost them. The Krell always sent more soldiers to investigate when a patrol went missing. Nina lost people every week. Good people who died fighting for a world that seemed already lost. But every dead Krell soldier was a message. Earth was still fighting. Across the ocean and what remained of London, other resistance groups did the same. In the ruins of Tokyo, in the occupied zones of Sydney and the burning streets of Mexico City, humans fought back. They were not winning, but they were not surrendering either. In the Amazon research facility, Lily Chen worked 18-hour days. The facility was hidden beneath the jungle canopy, invisible to Krell sensors. Here, scientists from every nation worked together on the only thing that mattered, finding a way to save Earth. They had been studying the alien probe data for weeks. Marcus Webb had joined them, traveling from Mars on one of the last transport ships before the Krell destroyed all spacecraft in the solar system. Together they began to understand what they were looking at. The probe was not Krell technology. It belonged to a different species called the Varn. The Varn had fought the Krell centuries ago and had managed to stop them. The probe was a warning beacon, left behind to alert other civilizations about the Krell threat. But there was more. The probe contained fragments of a star map and references to something called a planetary defense system. The Varn had built weapon platforms and hidden them throughout the galaxy, designed specifically to fight the Krell. These weapons were in quantum storage, waiting to be activated. Earth was supposed to have one of these systems. Marcus explained to the group gathered around the holographic display. The Varn seeded dozens of worlds with the technology, but the activation codes were lost. Lily stared at the fragmentary data. Lost where? Do we have any clues? Marcus manipulated the display, showing a series of symbols. These patterns keep appearing in the probe's database. They match mathematical sequences that would be recognizable to any intelligent species. If the Varn made contact with early humans, they might have left instructions. The team began searching through every archaeological database they could access. Ancient ruins, cave paintings, mysterious artifacts that had puzzled historians for generations. They looked for anything that matched the Varn mathematical language. It took 3 weeks of searching. 3 weeks while the Krell tightened their grip on Earth. 3 weeks while resistance fighters died in the streets. Then a young archaeologist named Peter Harris found something. Cave paintings in Turkey, discovered decades ago but never fully analyzed. They were carved into rock walls in a system of caves that had been sealed for 12,000 years. The patterns matched. They were Varn mathematics, pointing to coordinates: Antarctica. The activation site was buried beneath 2 miles of ice in Antarctica. President Helen Morris received the news in her mobile command center, a converted cargo truck that moved constantly to avoid Krell detection. She looked at the data and understood immediately how dangerous this mission would be. Antarctica was on the other side of the world. The Krell controlled all the airspace. Getting there would be nearly impossible, but it was their only chance. She authorized the mission and called for volunteers. They needed soldiers, pilots, scientists, and engineers. They needed the best people humanity had left. The volunteers came forward by the hundreds. Everyone knew it was likely a one-way trip. No one cared. Earth needed heroes, and they were ready to answer. Captain Ryan Foster was chosen to lead the military side of the operation. He was 38 years old, a career soldier who had survived the initial Krell attacks by sheer luck. He had been on leave visiting his family when the invasion began. His family died in the bombardment of Seattle. Now he lived for only one thing: making the Krell pay. The team assembled in what remained of a military base in southern Argentina. They had 3 cargo aircraft, retrofitted with stealth technology that might keep them hidden from Krell sensors. Might. There were no guarantees. Peter Harris would go with them to decode the Varn systems. Lily Chen insisted on coming too, despite protests that she was too valuable to risk. She argued that someone who understood the probe technology needed to be there. Finally, they agreed. The night before they left, Nina Hayes received a coded message. The resistance was to launch coordinated attacks on every Krell position they could reach. It would be a diversion, drawing attention away from Antarctica. Nina understood what it meant. Most of her people would die. She gathered her cell and told them the plan. "This is it," she said, looking at the faces around her, faces that had become like family over the weeks of fighting together. "Tomorrow we hit them with everything we have. We probably will not survive. But somewhere, other people are trying to save us all. Our job is to give them time." No one argued. They spent the night checking weapons and saying quiet goodbyes. At dawn, they would attack. The aircraft carrying Ryan's team took off in the middle of the night, flying low over the ocean to avoid detection. They flew through storms and around Krell patrol routes, their pilots performing maneuvers that should have been impossible in such heavy aircraft. They lost one plane in the crossing. A Krell patrol spotted it over the southern Atlantic and shot it down. 40 people died falling into the cold ocean below. The other 2 aircraft continued on. Meanwhile, across the world, the resistance attacked. Nina led her people out of the tunnels and into the streets of New York. They hit a Krell command post with everything they had. Explosives, modified weapons, and pure desperate courage. The battle was brutal. Nina's group fought through the outer defenses, losing people with every meter they advanced. She saw friends die around her but kept moving forward. They reached the command center and planted their explosives. Nina was hit as she tried to retreat. A Krell energy weapon caught her in the back and she fell. Her second-in-command dragged her toward cover, but she knew she was dying. She could not feel her legs go, she whispered. "Get out." The explosives detonated and the Krell command center collapsed. Nina Hayes died in the rubble, but her sacrifice bought the resistance precious time. Around the world, similar attacks kept the Krell busy. They did not notice the 2 aircraft approaching Antarctica. Ryan Foster looked out the window at the endless white landscape below. Somewhere under all that ice was humanity's last hope. His team prepared their equipment, checking and rechecking everything. They were almost there. The aircraft landed near the coordinates Peter had calculated. The team emerged into the freezing wind and began their descent into the ice. The Varn weapons platforms filled Earth's orbit like guardians rising from an ancient dream. Each platform was massive, built with technology that humanity could barely understand. Their weapons charged with energies that made the sensors scream. The Krell Armada, which had been moments away from destroying the last human resistance, suddenly faced an enemy they had not seen in centuries. The first salvo from the Varn platforms was devastating. Beams of pure energy lanced across space, striking Krell ships with precision that spoke of incredible computing power. The alien vessels that had shrugged off human weapons now broke apart under the assault. Their shields failed. Their hulls shattered. Ships that had carried thousands of Krell soldiers became clouds of debris. In the Amazon facility, Lily Chen would never arrive to see what her sacrifice had achieved. But Marcus Webb watched the displays with tears streaming down his face. The defense grid was working exactly as the Varn had designed it. Every platform operated in perfect coordination, their weapons creating overlapping fields of fire that the Krell could not escape. The shield generators activated next, creating protective barriers over Earth's surface. The blue-white energy field shimmered in the sky, visible even in daylight. The Krell ground forces looked up and saw their doom written in light. Without support from orbit, they were trapped. The Krell commander aboard the flagship Devastation watched his fleet die around him. In 300 years of conquest, the Krell Dominion had never faced defeat. They had crushed 100 civilizations. They had turned thriving worlds into slave colonies. But now, in this backwater system, defending a species that should have been easy prey, they were losing. The commander made a decision born of rage and desperation. If the Krell could not have Earth, then no one would. He ordered the activation of the World Cracker, a weapon so powerful that it was only used on planets already stripped of resources. A weapon designed to shatter worlds. The Devastation's core began to charge. Massive energy collectors drew power from the ship's reactor, building toward a release that would crack Earth's crust and tear the planet apart. It would take 5 minutes to reach full charge. 5 minutes that the commander planned to use destroying as many Varn platforms as possible. On Earth, President Helen Morris stood in what remained of the command center. Alarms were ringing. Scientists had detected the energy buildup in the Krell flagship. They knew what it meant. She opened a communication channel to all remaining military forces. Her voice was steady, even though she knew she was likely ordering people to their deaths. All ships, all stations. The enemy is charging a planet-killer weapon. We have minutes at most. Get everyone to shelters. Activate all emergency protocols. In orbit, Captain Paul Stevens commanded the frigate Defiance, one of the last human ships still functional. He was 53 years old and had been flying spacecraft for 30 years. He had survived the initial Krell attack through a combination of skill and luck. Now he looked at the energy readings from the devastation and understood that his luck had run out. The Varn platforms were concentrating fire on the Krell flagship, but its shields were stronger than the other ships. It would take time to break through. Time that Earth did not have. Paul opened his communication system. All personnel abandon ship. Get to the escape pods. You have 3 minutes. His crew began to evacuate, but Paul stayed at the controls. He plotted a course toward the Krell flagship, toward the heaviest concentration of enemy ships. Every second he could buy them, every moment he could draw the Krell's attention, might give the Varn weapons time to destroy the devastation. The Defiance accelerated toward the enemy lines. Other human ships, those that could still fly, saw what Paul was doing and followed. They were tiny compared to the Krell vessels, like insects attacking a bear. But they were determined. Paul's ship shook as Krell weapons found their mark. Hull breaches appeared. Systems failed. But he kept the Defiance on course, heading straight for the devastation. His weapons fired continuously, knowing they were doing almost no damage, but forcing the Krell to respond. In the Amazon facility, Marcus Webb watched helplessly as the displays showed the human ships making their final charge. He looked at the energy readings from the Krell flagship. 4 minutes to full charge. The Varn platforms needed 3 more minutes to break through the shields. They were not going to make it. Then Marcus saw something in the data that made his heart skip. The Varn platforms had one more weapon system, something they had never wanted to use, a quantum disruption device that would create a sphere of annihilation 500,000 kilometers across. Everything in that sphere would cease to exist. The Krell fleet would be destroyed instantly. So would every human ship and station in orbit. So would the Varn platforms themselves. Thousands of humans would die, but Earth's surface, protected by the shield generators, would survive. Marcus stared at the controls. He had the authorization codes. Lily had given them to him before she left in case something went wrong. He could activate the weapon. He could save Earth, but it would cost thousands of lives. His hand shook as he entered the codes. The quantum disruption weapon began to charge. It would take 60 seconds to activate. In space, Paul Stevens saw the devastation directly ahead. His ship was dying around him, but he had done his job. He had bought time. He opened the general communication channel one last time. This is Captain Paul Stevens of the Defiance. To anyone listening, it has been an honor to serve with you. Take care of Earth for us. The escape pods scattered in every direction, small vessels fleeing from the coming destruction. Some would make it beyond the disruption field. Most would not. The crews knew it, but they tried anyway. That was what humans did. They tried. Marcus completed the activation sequence. The Varn platforms glowed with a light that outshone the sun. Reality itself began to bend and twist in the space around them. The Krell sensors detected the buildup, and finally, too late, the Krell commander understood what was about to happen. He tried to order a retreat, but there was no time. The quantum disruption activated at exactly 14:32 GMT. The effect was instantaneous. A sphere of absolute annihilation expanded from the Varn platforms. Everything it touched simply stopped existing. No explosion, no debris. One moment the Krell Armada was there. 347 ships carrying millions of soldiers. The next moment they were gone. Erased from reality as thoroughly as if they had never been. The Varn platforms went with them, having fulfilled their final purpose. Paul Stevens and the Defiance ceased to exist in the same instant, along with 9 of the remaining human ships. But 947 escape pods cleared the disruption field, carrying the survivors. On Earth, people in the cities looked up and saw the flash of light that marked the end of the battle. For a moment, no one understood what had happened. Then the reports began to come in. The Krell were gone. The orbital sensors showed nothing. Empty space where the alien fleet had been. It took an hour for the full truth to spread. Earth had survived. The Krell had been defeated, but the cost had been staggering. Half of Earth's population was dead. Entire cities were ruins. The orbital infrastructure was destroyed, and thousands of brave people had given their lives in the final moments of the battle. President Helen Morris emerged from her bunker and stood in the ruins of what had once been Washington, D.C. The air smelled of smoke and death, but above her the sky was clear of alien ships. She addressed the survivors from the steps of the broken Capitol building. "Today we remember," she said, her voice carried by every working communication device on the planet. "We remember Jake Harrison, who gave his life to show us the enemy could bleed. We remember Nina Hayes, who died fighting in the streets. We remember Ryan Foster and his team, who activated the weapons that saved us. We remember Paul Stevens and all those who made the final sacrifice." Around the world, people listened. Some cried. Others simply stood in shocked silence. They had survived, but the world was broken. "We also remember this," Helen continued. "Humanity refused to surrender. When the Krell came expecting easy prey, they found warriors. They found people willing to die for their home. They found us." In the Amazon facility, Marcus Webb shut down the systems. His part was done. The Varn database was still intact, filled with information about the galaxy, about other species, about threats and wonders beyond Earth. He would spend the rest of his life studying it, but for now he walked outside and looked at the sky. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of orange and red. It was beautiful. It was home. And it had survived. The recovery would take decades. Cities needed to be rebuilt. The population had to heal from trauma that would echo through generations. But humanity had something now that it never had before: unity of purpose. They knew they were not alone in the universe. They knew the galaxy was dangerous, and they knew they could survive it. Deep in the Varn database, Marcus found one final message. It was a set of coordinates, locations of worlds where the Varn civilization might still exist. It was an invitation, written in hope across the ages, a request to join them among the stars. Earth would need time to rebuild, but one day humanity would accept that invitation. They would venture out into the galaxy, not as conquerors or victims. The wind in Antarctica was cold enough to kill. Ryan Foster felt it cut through his protective gear as his team set up their equipment near the coordinates Peter Harris had identified. Around them, the ice stretched in every direction, an endless white desert beneath a gray sky. They had brought drilling equipment and ground-penetrating radar. Peter directed the setup, his hands shaking from cold and excitement. The radar showed something beneath the ice, exactly where the ancient cave paintings said it would be: a structure. Massive and geometric, and definitely not natural. The drilling took 2 days. 2 days of constant work while lookouts watched the sky for Krell patrols. 2 days of wondering if they had been spotted, and when the attack would come. But the resistance attacks around the world had worked. The Krell were too busy fighting in the cities to notice activity in the frozen wasteland. When they broke through to the structure, Peter almost cried. The drill bit pulled up fragments of metal that showed no rust, no decay, despite being buried for thousands of years. This was it. This was the Varn facility. They widened the hole and sent down exploring drones. The cameras showed a doorway covered in the same geometric patterns from the cave paintings. The team suited up in climbing gear and began their descent. It took 3 hours to reach the bottom, rappelling down through 2 miles of ice and rock. Ryan was the first to reach the door. He placed his gloved hand on the metal surface and felt a vibration. The door was responding to their presence. Peter came down next, followed by Lily Chen and the rest of the team. They stood in the ice cave, staring at the ancient entrance. Peter studied the symbols carved into the door. His breath came out in visible clouds as he worked, comparing the patterns to the translations they had made. His fingers traced the carvings, pressing them in a specific sequence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door began to open with a deep grinding sound that echoed through the ice. Light spilled out from inside, white and pure. The team stared in amazement. Power. After 12,000 years, the facility still had power. They entered carefully, weapons ready despite knowing that no enemy had been here for millennia. The corridor beyond the door was wide and tall, designed for beings larger than humans. Emergency lighting activated as they walked, responding to their movement. The walls were smooth and covered in more of the geometric script. "It is like they expected someone to come," Lily said softly. "They did," Peter replied. They left this as a gift, a weapon against the Krell. The corridor descended deeper into the rock beneath the ice. They walked for nearly an hour before reaching the main chamber. When they entered, everyone stopped and stared. The chamber was enormous, the size of a cathedral. In the center stood a control nexus, a platform covered in crystalline displays that glowed with soft light. Around the walls, massive cylinders reached from floor to ceiling, each one containing something that hummed with barely contained energy. "This is it," Lily breathed. She moved to the control nexus and began examining the displays. The interface was not designed for human hands, but the mathematical language was clear. She began to understand what she was looking at. "It is a planetary defense system," she explained to the others. "Orbital weapons platforms, shield generators, everything we need. All of it is in quantum storage, ready to deploy. The Varn must have built these on dozens of worlds." Ryan moved closer. "Can you activate it?" Lily's fingers moved over the controls, translating the Varn script. Her expression changed from hope to concern. "Yes, but there is a problem. The system needs massive energy to activate, more than our portable generators can provide." "What kind of energy source?" Ryan asked. Lily pointed to the cylinders around the room. "The facility has its own core, a quantum reactor, but activating it will trigger a chain reaction. The energy release will be enormous. This entire section of Antarctica will become a crater. Anyone here will die." The team stood in silence. They had known this might be a one-way mission. But knowing it intellectually was different from hearing it stated so clearly. One of the soldiers, a young man named Kevin Price, spoke up. "How long do we have once it is activated?" "Maybe 10 minutes, Lily said. "Long enough to get the defense grid online. Not long enough to escape." Ryan looked at his team. He saw fear in their faces, but also determination. They had come too far to stop now. "Does anyone want to leave?" Last chance, no one moved. They had made their choice when they volunteered. Above them, on the surface, the lookout spotted movement in the sky. Krell ships, 3 of them, heading in their direction. Someone had finally noticed the activity in Antarctica. The lookout sent a warning down to the team below. "We are out of time," Ryan said. "Do it." Lily began the activation sequence. Her hands moved over the controls, inputting commands in the Varn mathematical language. The crystals in the cylinders began to glow brighter. A sound filled the chamber, low and deep, a vibration that they felt in their bones. Above them, the Krell ships began their attack. Energy beams struck the ice, sending up massive clouds of steam. The lookouts on the surface ran for cover, but there was nowhere to hide on the endless ice. They died bravely, buying a few more seconds for the team below. The facility shook as the Krell bombardment intensified. Ice fell from the ceiling of the chamber. Cracks appeared in the walls. But the activation sequence continued. The quantum reactor was coming online. Peter worked beside Lily, translating the final instructions. "There," he said, pointing to a sequence of symbols. "That is the final authorization. Once you enter it, the reactor goes critical and the defense grid deploys." The shaking grew worse. The Krell had found the entrance hole and were firing directly down it. The team could hear explosions echoing through the corridors. Lily's finger hovered over the final control. She looked at Ryan. 10 minutes. Maybe less. Are you ready?" Ryan thought about Earth burning, about the millions who had already died, about Nina Hayes and Jake Harrison and all the others who had given their lives. He thought about his family dead in Seattle. He nodded. Lily activated the final sequence. The reactor came online with a roar of power. The cylinders blazed with light so bright that everyone had to shield their eyes. The facility shook violently. Warning alarms began to sound, ancient systems detecting the chain reaction beginning in the core. In orbit above Earth, space itself began to ripple. The quantum storage fields collapsed and the Varn defense platforms materialized. Massive weapons platforms, each one bigger than any ship humanity had ever built. Shield generators that created overlapping fields across the planet. Point defense systems and targeting computers that had waited 12,000 years to serve their purpose. The Krell Armada, which had been preparing its final assault on Earth's remaining cities, suddenly found itself facing an enemy it had thought was extinct. The Varn weapons opened fire. In the Amazon facility, scientists watched their sensors in disbelief. The defense grid was online. The weapons were working. Krell ships were dying. President Helen Morris received the news in her command vehicle. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope. Earth had a chance. In Antarctica, the team felt the facility beginning to tear itself apart. The walls cracked. The ceiling began to collapse. The quantum reactor was building toward detonation. Ryan gathered his people. "It has been an honor," he said simply. They stood together in the center of the chamber as the light grew brighter and brighter. Above them, the Krell ships tried to flee, but it was too late. The reactor reached critical mass. The explosion was visible from space. A section of the Antarctic ice shelf simply vanished, replaced by a crater of molten rock that glowed like a small sun. Ryan Foster and his team died instantly, their sacrifice ensuring that the defense grid had enough power to fully activate. The Varn weapons, no longer waiting in quantum storage, began their work in earnest. The tide of the war had turned,